We can basically put digital audio ads into two buckets. On the one bucket, we have streaming and DAI podcasts, dynamic ad insertion podcasts. And on the other side, we basically have podcasts with baked in ads. On the baked in side, these are ads or branding that is not inserted by ad tech. And so it means everyone who listens to or downloads an episode or a series kind of hears the same ad or branding. So we're talking about the podcast with baked in ads, but also we're talking about some of those smaller campaigns. Say if we can't do it with the live tag methodology, we can actually turn to another methodology here, kind of lump them in with the baked in ads. And this also includes branded content. If you have a fully branded series or a bonus episode, or just anything that's not using dynamic ad insertion for whatever reason that may be. So with the baked in and more category, that bucket, we use something called simulated or controlled exposure. And in this methodology, what we do is we actually recruit in podcast listeners to take our survey. And what we do is we make sure that they are listeners who are open to the category or genre of the kind of podcast content we're going to ask them to listen to. So if it's like business content, they should be people who say, hey, yeah, I'll listen to a business podcast. Same thing with comedy, et cetera, et cetera. So we invite them in, and then in the survey environment online, they actually listen to the content. And then we follow up with a survey, right? So it's always following up after someone hears content one way or another, we follow up with a survey. Again, we can do and have to do a control cell. And what we do is we recruit in listeners, and then they don't hear any branding. So they might hear the podcast content, but without the ad, and they take the same survey. We call this simulator controlled exposure because we're basically simulating their normal listening habits in this survey environment. There's some advantages to this particular method. It's not reliant on ad tech. So if you're not dynamically inserting ads, we can still do it. We can test nearly any kind of podcast content at any time. And this actually includes YouTube. And the anytime is also important. We can actually do this before a campaign flights. We can do it while the campaign is in market, but we can also do it post-campaign. And I'll admit, I've done some of those where we've definitely had a team come to us and say, now the advertiser, is looking at this and they wish they'd run a study. What can we do? Well, we can use this simulated controlled exposure methodology. Even though the campaign is wrapped, we can still go and test it and get a really good read on its impact. Some of the limitations are that the content was not organically heard as part of survey participants' normal listening habits. So they might be into comedy if it's a comedy podcast and really enjoy it, but they might not be regular listeners or fans of that particular show, which means we're not getting a specifically direct in-market impact at that time. So let's have a case study here on how this simulated controlled exposure methodology worked. We measured a branded series for OnStar called Tell Me What Happened, which featured true stories of people helping people at the most pivotal moments of their lives. In this study, we found there was a 72% lift in unaided awareness of OnStar, 29% lift in favorability, and 33% lift in purchase consideration, right? This means in these measures, people who heard this branded podcast had much higher sentiment, much better sentiment about OnStar compared to people who did not hear this series. So really considered a rousing success here for this branded content.